We're taking a look back at the biggest political turning points, trends, and controversies as we hit rewind on Rising. We've got the power players, scandals, and outrageous decisions that have defined our conversations.
Are aliens traveling to Earth using dark energy propulsion? Well, Harvard astronomer Avi Loeb wrote a paper last year about how gravity and dark energy could hypothetically be manipulated to enable humans to travel through space. So are aliens using this same system? Here to discuss this possibility is Dr. Avi Loeb himself. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
All right. So last time we talked, you were on your boat the South Atlantic. Is that right, or South Pacific?
Yeah, Pacific.
Okay, and you were dredging up these spherical objects from the ocean floor that you argue are interstellar in nature. In other words, they came from outside of the solar system and ended up dispersing into these tiny particles. Remind us again of what evidence exists that you think suggests that those are part of extraterrestrial life.
Well, this meteor that was more than half a meter in size was spotted by US government satellites back in 2014, almost a decade ago. It was moving very fast, actually faster than 95% of all the stars in the vicinity of the sun when it was outside the solar system. It came from interstellar space based on its speed, the speed recorded by the US Space Command. And moreover, it had material strength that was tougher than all the space rocks cataloged by NASA over the past decade. So that raised the possibility that it's a Voyager-like meteor. In other words, imagine our own spacecraft, Voyager, leaving the solar system and colliding with a planet like the Earth. It would appear as a meteor. And the question is the unusual material strength and speed of that object testimony to the fact that it's artificial, technological in origin. So we went to the Pacific Ocean to retrieve the materials from this object. We found 700 spherules. These are molten droplets from the surface of the object when it exploded over the Pacific Ocean. We brought them back to Harvard University. We used the best mass spectrometer that the world has to offer, and we now have the analysis results that will be discussed in a press release tomorrow, Tuesday, August 29th, 2023. I can give you the punchline. The punchline is basically the title of my book. And this book appears tomorrow as well.
So Interstellar, is that a suggestion that you have some confirmation that this is, in fact, interstellar particles that are evidence of some intelligent life from outside of our solar system?
Well, there are two fundamental questions. First, is the material itself from outside the solar system? That's the question that we're addressing in this new scientific paper, which was just submitted for publication. The second is, of course, whether this object was technological in origin. And the best way to address that second question would be to find a big piece of the object. That will be our follow-up expedition, because you can easily tell the difference between a piece of a rock and a technological gadget that may have buttons on it.
Now, at the end of last month, it seemed like, I mean, I don't want to characterize it as a hit piece, but the New York Times published a paper which included some criticisms from some of your colleagues about your work, people who questioned whether or not these spherical objects really are what you believe them to be, and questioning some of the math that is included in the trajectories as you've been analyzing, why you believe it's interstellar, what would actually happen if an interstellar object at the velocity that you described hit the Earth. Would there be anything left at all? And I want to give you an opportunity to respond to the argument that there is some inaccuracy here that would suggest that this is not, in fact, evidence of extraterrestrial life.
Well, I don't need to respond because I have the material and we examined it. And stay tuned for tomorrow. The point is, these people expressed opinions. The US Space Command came forward in a formal letter to NASA more than a year ago, in March 2022, where they said that at the 99.999% are confident that this meteor came from outside the solar system. We went out there, we found the spherules that very likely belong to this meteor, and Moreover, we analyze their composition. Irrespective of the speed, we can tell if the materials are different from solar system materials. And, it's not a matter of an opinion. I don't need to defend any because we have the materials. You see, there are two other types of people than real scientists. Real scientists seek the evidence, analyze the evidence, all the materials, and get to conclusions. But there are two other types of people. People who have opinions and talk about it forever, and people who are cheering for the work of science. They just publicize science. They talk about science, just like, movie commentators. They don't direct films. They just talk about the films being produced. And you have to distinguish between people who talk and people who walk the walk, who actually do the work of science. I'm talking about a scientific paper that we wrote, that I'm the first author on, submitted for publication with results that took us months to derive based on analysis of data of materials that we have in our possession. Everyone that expressed opinions about this did not have access to those materials.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of interest in this topic right now. In fact, investigative reporter Ross Coulthart claimed to know the, quote, form of non-human biologics recovered by the U.S. government. Let's watch that.
Just a quick question in regards to the non-human intelligence. Do you know what form it's in, and can you tell us?
I do. Well, at least I do know what I've been told, and I'm sorry I can't go there at the moment. I'm working on further revelations to come out very soon. I promise you that when I'm able to talk about that, I will. It's for a very, very good reason. It's to protect largely sources and methods who are helping me, and you'll see why soon.
What are your thoughts on these claims of non-human biologics? Do you think it's possible that those form is actually known by these whistleblowers, or is your work, so different or concentrated in such a different area that it's sort of a totally separate thing?
No. I mean, science is all about the evidence. If the U.S. government has some materials that demonstrate or substantiate these claims, let's see it. But if people just talk about it, it doesn't amount to much because people can fabricate stories. So telling the difference between what people talk about and what is really out there is the key here. It's not a matter of opinions because we are dealing with materials, with something that was retrieved according to Grush. And actually, Grush himself did not witness, according to him, any of those materials. So he just listened to 40 eyewitnesses who told him about these things. And I believe him, he's sincere, but the question is whether they fabricated the story or not. And until we see the evidence, I would not be convinced, because as a scientist, I'm just guided by evidence. There are lots of people who talk, but let's keep our eyes on the ball, as they say in basketball.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point, because you would expect that some of the witnesses would not just be, let's say, fighter pilots who saw an unidentified craft in the sky, but if what is being said is true about having alien bodies in custody, ships in custody, that I would like to hear that a material analyst, a physicist, a chemist, somebody with a scientific background who I would presume the government set to actually researching and understanding what it is that's before them would be among the whistleblowers, and that the kind of data that we could be getting, the kind of reporting that we could be getting secondhand from those whistleblowers is not just, I saw the thing, but there was this life form that was comprised of these elements that aren't available on Earth. Just the way that you've described the alloys in these spherical objects as being of a nature that wouldn't be naturally occurring on the planet. So that's very persuasive. And I understand the people with firsthand knowledge being concerned about coming forward and the nature of a whistleblower and all of that. But I would expect that the nature of some of the disclosures to be a little bit more specific, a little more substantive, a little bit more evidence-based than just, I saw the thing. I don't know.
Yeah, I completely agree. One issue about biology is that, life as we know it here on Earth developed, based on Darwinian evolution, such that it survives under the circumstances here on Earth, where we have an atmosphere, we have liquid water. Going to space is very risky for biological creatures because there is bombardment by cosmic rays, energetic particles, and it takes a long time, for objects moving at the speed of our spacecraft. It would take 500 million years to traverse the Milky Way galaxy. And, that's a very long time for any form of life to survive. And of course, we found some worms in the Siberian permafrost that survived for 46,000 years frozen. But our biology is still not advanced enough to allow us to imagine that you can survive a trip of millions or billions of years. And so I would be skeptical until they show us the evidence. And other than that, I would think that it's probably, if there are any functional devices, they will be all about technology, with artificial intelligence. That would be my tendency. And by the way, David Grush ventured into territories that he is not an expert on. He was talking about physics that may explain the kind of things he heard. I can tell you as a physicist, this made very little sense.
Thank you so much for filling us in. Your work fascinates us. We can't wait to have you back very soon. Dr. Loeb, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
In the first of its kind House hearing on unidentified anomalous phenomena, whistleblower David Grush blew open a discussion about interdimensional beings, touching on holographic theory. Let's listen.
In terms of multidimensionality, that kind of thing, the framework that I'm familiar with, for example, is something called the holographic principle. It derives itself from general relativity and quantum mechanics, and that is, if you want to imagine a 3D object such as yourself casting a shadow onto a 2D surface, that's the holographic principle. So you can be projected, quasi-projected from higher dimensional space to lower dimensional. It's a scientific trope that you can actually cross, literally, as far as I understand, but there's probably guys with PhDs that we could probably argue about that.
But you have not seen any documentation that that's what's occurring?
Only a theoretical framework discussion. Yes.
If any of that went over your head, professor of science at Harvard and author of Extraterrestrial, the First Sign of Intelligent Life Beyond Earth, Dr. Avi Loeb, is joining us to break this down. Welcome, Dr. Loeb.
Thanks for having me.
So can you tell us a little bit about what he's explaining there, the holographic theory, and how that might help us understand the technology that UAPs or UFOs are using?
I don't think that's very relevant. The holographic principle is a concept considered in the context of string theory in a way of unifying quantum mechanics and gravity in the context of extra dimensions, meaning we know of 3 dimensions of space and of time. And string theory argues that in order to unify quantum mechanics and gravity, the 2 pillars of modern physics, they need to consider additional spatial dimensions. And then they have proven mathematically some equivalence between quantum field theory and gravity within those extra dimensions. That's, first of all, not known to be a description of reality. String theory is a purely mathematical concept at the moment. We don't know whether there are extra dimensions. Theoretical physicists talk about it for decades, but we have no clue whatsoever that there is any extra dimension beyond the 3 spatial dimensions we have. So mentioning that in the context of technology is completely inappropriate because we don't know whether even there are extra dimensions and whether it applies to the reality that we all share. It's just a mathematical concept at this point within string theory, which is not proven by any means to be correct. There was no experimental evidence for string theory, and we don't see any prospect for getting experimental evidence in the coming decades. So the way I would think of it is just as a mathematical concept that has no relevance to technology, no relevance to the real world, and I'm just surprised that he even mentioned that.
Yeah, and he did say that it was just a theoretical concept, but I also was kind of confused as to why it was brought up. I mean, based on your research, what is the best explanation of where these UAPs are coming from exactly, if not a different realm or different period of time?
Well, we can, first of all, they're not moving at speeds that cannot be explained by conventional physics. I mean, they might be moving at speeds and accelerations that exceed those attainable by our technology, but, you know, they don't move faster than light. They don't move at an acceleration that cannot be explained. And so if there are functional devices near Earth that were constructed by some alien technological manufacturer, you know, they might have propulsion systems that are different than the ones we use. And, you know, I wouldn't call for new physics in this context. The people that are talking about new physics often are not very familiar with old physics, the physics we know. So for them, talking about new physics is an easy thing. But if you look at modern physics, you know, over the past few decades, it was really difficult to find new principles, new laws of physics, new phenomena. Every time a nuance is found on what we already know, it gets the Nobel Prize. And so, and actually the recent Nobel Prizes were awarded for things that were known for decades. So it's just non-professional for someone that doesn't know the physics we actually already know to talk about new physics. And moreover, you know, if we don't have good data, in these cases of the Nimitz incident and of what, you know, the pilots are talking about, the Ryan Graves was talking about, you know, we don't have the data. We don't have any physical evidence measurements that can allow us to assess what they are reporting about. So talking about new physics is irresponsible under these circumstances. In order to consider new physics, we need exquisite data that we cannot explain with conventional physics. And non-professionals just talk about it in a cavalier way. Just, you know, well, maybe it's new physics, but that's not the way science is done. We need exquisite data from instruments, not from eyewitnesses. And we don't have that for these reports.
So, Dr. Loeb, with the existing physics that we have and have proven with many years of science, it seems to me that people are just inventing new physics to try and explain something other than perhaps aliens exist. What do you make of what's coming out in the hearing? Do you find that there's merit in Grush's claims about UFOs and UAPs that have been obtained by the U.S. government, military and intelligence community, and that there are biologics, as Grush said?
Yeah, so just think of yourself as a juror listening to witnesses in the courtroom. And the question is, would you believe him? Would you believe them? Now, they talk about experiences, the pilots. We haven't had access to the actual data, so we cannot assess whether what they're talking about is just their personal impressions and how reliable these are, how unusual the phenomena that they saw were. And with respect to Grush, I would like to see someone who had firsthand experience of the evidence, like saw the materials, saw the actual spacecraft that he's talking about, and talks about it. He is talking about what other people told him. 40 witnesses. I don't care about how many people talked with him. The issue is I want to hear someone who actually saw the materials, or I want to see some footage, or I want to get some information, evidence that as a scientist I can analyze. Without that, it's just hearsay. Now, of course, the important development from this hearing is that he was willing to provide contacts, information to representatives such that they would contact people with first-hand experience. And presumably that could lead to the release of information. But until that information is released, until we see footage, until we actually see a spacecraft or materials that came from there, we cannot assess whether it's real. It could be all fabricated.
Right, and I understand at some point during the hearing, some lawmakers went into a skiff with David Grush to apparently review some video evidence or get the names of these individuals that they could reach out to. Aside from whether or not Grush's claims are believable or need more evidence attached to them, do you think it's a good sign in general that this hearing was had at all? And does this suggest that these lawmakers are taking the issue of UAPs seriously?
Definitely. I think the real meat is in the classified information. Okay, so we are not exposed to that. And perhaps some people who saw it initiated this process. And for us, it doesn't look as convincing as of now, but it would lead to some release of evidence and data. And, as an astronomer, it looks completely reasonable to expect the US government to be the first to notice something unusual because they monitor the sky during their day job for national security purposes. And they would be the first to notice something unusual in our sky, something crashing. Astronomers focus their telescopes on very distant sources of light. They ignore anything very close to Earth. And so, it's quite possible the US government has possession or information about the alien technologies. As a scientist, the sky is not classified, the oceans are not classified, so I'm seeking personally evidence for what lies in interstellar space. We just came back a month ago from an expedition to the Pacific Ocean to retrieve materials from the first recognized interstellar meteor. That's an object bigger than 0.5 meter that collided with Earth, had an unusual material strength, and was moving faster than 95% of the stars in the vicinity of the sun. And we want to check whether it's technological in origin. We are currently analyzing the materials at Harvard University and trying to figure it out.
Thank you, Dr. Avi Loeb, for breaking this down with us. I think this is on a lot of people's minds right now, given the congressional hearing. Looking forward to follow up.
Thank you.
NASA's James Webb Space Telescope released stunning images of outer space this week. Webb is said to be the successor to the Hubble telescope and is supposed to give a deeper glimpse into our universe.
Here to talk about this groundbreaking technology is Dr. Avi Loeb, professor of science at Harvard and the director of the Institute for Theory and Computation. Dr. Loeb, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're so glad to have you with us. I think we were all in awe of the images we were seeing yesterday. Talk to us a little bit about the technology that makes this possible.
Well, the James Webb Space Telescope is unique. First, in terms of its size, it's 6.5 meters in diameter, about 7 times in area than the Hubble Space Telescope that gave us a previous glimpse at the universe. And it's also sensitive in the infrared. If you imagine stars in the very early universe emitting light in the optical visible band or the ultraviolet, that light will be stretched by the cosmic expansion so that it will appear in the infrared for us now. And so this telescope is giving us sensitivity that is unprecedented to look at the very first stars and galaxies in the universe, sort of the scientific genesis of the light, let there be light. And then, moreover, it allows us to look for signs of life on other planets, and we can talk about that.
Yeah, in fact, one Twitter user said of the telescope, the James Webb Telescope can scan for chemical composition and atmospheres of exoplanets. This is the first one ever done, and it shows atmospheric water vapor. Prepare for alien life reveal on other worlds soon. Is that something we should be thinking about, little green men, or something perhaps less dramatic?
Not really on this planet. This is what is called a gas giant. It's half the mass of Jupiter, so it's made mostly of gas, whereas life as we know it is possible on a planet that has a rocky surface like the Earth with a thin atmosphere on top of it. Definitely not this planet, but we can tell that this planet has water on it, which is remarkable. Of course, water is a necessary ingredient for life as we know it, but we also need a solid surface with a thin atmosphere. So there will be other planets that perhaps will have that. And for example, there is the TRAPPIST system of planets that the Webb will look at. And we look forward to seeing the composition of the atmospheres of some of those rocky planets. And beyond that, there is obviously interest in searching for how planets form and searching for fragments that arrive to the solar system from other planetary systems.
And can you talk about how it is that, because of the nature of what we're doing, we're peering across such a vast distance, we're actually sort of seeing a snapshot in time, right, in the past, because of it being the time it would take that light to reach us. I'm butchering the actual science of it, but can you, an expert, speak to that?
Right. So we know that the universe is expanding. So if we go back in time, there was a time when the density of the universe was infinite. That's called the Big Bang. And we don't know what happened before the Big Bang, how the Big Bang emerged. But we can look at the universe after the Big Bang. And if we look at great distances, it takes light a long time to reach us from those distances. And therefore, we see how the universe looked like at early times. It's sort of like a time machine, but in fact, we're just looking far away and we see what happened early on far away, which is remarkable. So we can get an image of how the universe looked like. The first image we have is of the so-called cosmic radiation background, cosmic microwave background, 400,000 years after the Big Bang. That's a very short time. Back then, there were no galaxies, no stars. And after that, there was a period of that we call the Dark Ages, the cosmic Dark Ages, that were followed by cosmic dawn, when the first stars formed in the universe and sort of lit up like lights on a Christmas tree. And we can look at those. And the Webb allows us the first glimpse at those early times when the first stars and galaxies formed. I started working on this subject about 3 decades ago. Back then, there were only a handful of people interested in it. I was on the first advisory committee that designed the James Webb Space Telescope for that purpose. It was designed to be a telescope sensitive in the infrared, so we can see at light that is arriving to us from far away. The first galaxies were very small. They were sort of like Lego pieces that came together to make a galaxy like our own Milky Way galaxy today. And so they are very challenging to detect because they were faint, intrinsically faint, but also when we look at them, we are looking far away. So we have this telescope, the Webb Telescope, made of a lot of segments, 18 segments of beryllium coated with gold that was placed 1 million miles away from Earth. And it is being shielded from sunlight so that it's very cold and can look deep into space without any background from the atmosphere of the Earth or the sun. And it cost us $10 billion, this telescope, but nature is very kind to us. It provides us with natural lenses. We call them gravitational lenses. When you have a cluster of galaxies, a collection of 1,000 galaxies like the Milky Way together, they can focus the light from behind. And then the exceptional sensitivity of the James Webb Space Telescope is aided by a natural telescope, and we can go even deeper. That's the image that was shown in the White House.
So the telescope is you said how far away? How long did it take to get it into position?
Right. So we're looking at an image of the universe that, from 13 billion years ago. The age of the universe, the Big Bang, took place 13.8. So the universe was an infant back then, and just about 800 million years. We think that the first stars, the first galaxies, started forming around 100 million years, so we still have a way to go. It's like an archaeological dig. The deeper we go, the more ancient are the layers that we uncover.
And you said earlier that that particular planet wasn't likely to yield any evidence of life because it didn't have a rocky surface. But there's also this phrasing of life as we know it, life as we know it. It always strikes me as curious, I gotta say, as a Star Trek fan, to think that we do conceptualize of human life as this kind of or life is, in these very human Earth-centric terms. Is there not the possibility, or is there any interrogation into what it would look like for life to develop on a gas giant, or to be kind of very different in form, non-corporeal life, different kinds of expressions of life? Is there a way to even think about and identify and try to search for those kinds of things as we get greater and greater capacity to look deeper and deeper into the universe?
That's an excellent question. And one thing I learned by being a scientist is that we should be modest. I call it cosmic modesty because nature is more imaginative than we are. And it's quite possible that there are forms of life very different than we find here on Earth. For example, most of the objects that are rocky are actually far away from a host star, and they are completely frozen. But underneath the layer of ice on their surface, there could be an ocean. And the question is there life in that ocean? Are there fish? And there are some satellites or moons of planets in the solar system, like Enceladus or Europa, that are thought to potentially have life under the icy surface. It will be difficult for us to drill that surface, but we can see plumes of gas coming out, geysers, and we can search whether there are any indications for life underneath the ice. But also in the gas giants, it's possible that there are different forms of life than we are used to. And there was discussions about phosphine on Venus, that perhaps in the clouds of Venus, there are droplets of water that carry life in them. Very different from what we see on Earth, because the surface of Venus is too hot to maintain liquid water. And, you know, the sky's the limit in that sense. There could be many other routes towards life that we don't even imagine at the moment. I very much hope that, seeing what happens in world politics, that there is intelligence higher than ours out there. So anyone frustrated by what happens in DC may just stay tuned, because we might learn something from a smarter kid on our cosmic block.
Well, thank you so much, Professor, for shedding some light on these wondrous images and describing them in such literary quality. So we appreciate it.
My pleasure.
We'll have more Rising right after this.